Now, we've all heard the stories about Japan's work culture. Overwork, unpaid overtime, never leaving before your boss. But what about the social side that's so heavily embedded into the Japanese work culture that no one talks about? Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Emmy. I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, and on this channel, I try to bring the authentic side of Japan from a unique native perspective. So for a little bit of context about myself before I get into this topic, actually, I like to give a little brief explanation of, my origins and how I grew up. So I was born and raised in Tokyo. However, I did go to an international school since kindergarten. So kindergarten up until high school, I was sort of raised into this bubble. If you went to an international school, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but it's sort of like secluded from everyday life, especially if you live in Asia. You're surrounded by a bunch of people who are from different parts of the world. Everyone speaks English, and everyone as a whole, we sort of adopt this personality where we could definitely fit into North America if we could move there right now. I feel like with a sense of belonging, we don't necessarily feel 100% belonged in Japan, especially like growing up in an international environment like that. So yeah, up until this point, I actually only worked in Canada. So I did a couple internships there, and I had a couple part-time jobs here and there as well, working in different industries. So I had a lot of work experience in Canada, and right now currently I work full-time in Tokyo. I'm not gonna say what company, but I will say it's not corporate. It's not as intense as what Japanese people experience on a day-to-day basis, thankfully. But within the last few weeks alone of me working, I have already noticed some things within the Japanese culture that I genuinely have been so confused about, and it made me reflect on a lot of things. I feel like I'm at a crossroads where it's like, one thing is a language barrier, but second of all, even if I were to find a company that may not have Japanese as a requirement, I do feel like working with Japanese people in general, there's sort of these unwritten social norms and codes that is so heavily embedded into the culture that I can't get myself to fully adapt to, just because I don't agree with it and I can't understand it myself. And I feel like conforming to these rules that I don't agree with just makes me feel like it's not me. It's not something that I want to do in my life. It's not something that I want to suck up to just because it's, oh, you live in Japan. Like, I don't want to live a life like this. For a little bit of context, I would like to introduce a term called black companies. So a black company in Japan is a company with questionable or unethical working conditions, such as long hours, harassment, and labor exploitation. A black company is essentially a company that exploits its workers in an area of ways, one of them being overtime, unpaid work, as well as just in general a very extremely toxic environment. Now, the reason why I bring up black companies is because not only do these companies exist everywhere in Japan, it's the fact that cultural and social expectations in Japan prevent a lot of people from leaving these types of black companies. The reason why this is because speaking up culturally is seen to be disrespectful, let alone challenging someone's opinions. Challenging your superior or challenging your employer's opinions or thoughts is completely out of the picture. It's not only considered rude, but it's something that you should never ever do culturally. And obviously that ties in with how people are in companies or when you work. The thing that needs to be heavily emphasized is that people find it very difficult, or literally people find it impossible to leave these companies even if they're being exploited. So there are several factors that sort of tie into how these deeply rooted social and cultural expectations refrain from people leaving these black companies. So number one is group harmony and social cohesion. So there's a Japanese word called wa, and wa basically indicates harmony. America has sort of a individualistic culture where everyone sort of looks out for themselves. However, in Japan, especially in East Asia in general, it's more of a collectivist culture, so everyone values maintaining harmony, which is why voicing your dissatisfaction, challenging authority, and let alone quitting can be seen as disrupting that harmony. It can be seen as selfish, it can be seen as disruptive, and nobody wants that. So people would rather endure that pain, endure that suffering, just so that it means that they can maintain that harmony. A second factor is a fear of stigmatization. So what I mean by that is those who speak up or leave jobs can be seen as disloyal. Those who speak out or leave can be seen as disloyal, which leads to stigmatization. This not only harms an individual's reputation in the company, but also within the community. Japanese society values stability. This sort of ties in with the collectivist versus individualistic culture. Japanese people tend to value stability and perseverance over personal ambition. So quitting a job, especially during rough times, can be seen as not being able to withstand hardship, for example, which is pretty I don't like that way of thinking, but that's sort of what's tied into the cultural aspect. Third factor is a strong sense of loyalty to employers. So the traditional Japanese work culture is that you stay loyal to your employer, and you'll see tons of people staying loyal to a singular company for tens of years. Whereas when you compare people in America right now, people in America emphasize the value and importance of jumping from one job to another in order to excel in your career. Whereas in Japan, people not only value stability, but they value stability because they need to stay loyal to their employers. Like, their job is their life. Like, they devote their entire selves to their job. As a result, people feel sort of indebted to their companies, and voicing their opinion may seem like a betrayal to the company, which they do not want. A fourth factor is the risk of damaging future work prospects. If employers see that you left a company really early or you switch jobs quite often, not only does this limit your possibilities of finding more jobs just because people see this as a red flag, but because people are aware of this fact, this sort of adds into the resistance to changing one's career as well as finding new job opportunities, just because they are resistant to change and scared of that. The next thing that I want to talk about that is very, very important is the hierarchical mindset and superiority complex. So it doesn't matter if you're working or not, no matter where you are in Japan in a social context, there's a rigid hierarchy that is present, especially in workplaces, where even small age differences or a difference in rank can determine how you interact with them. So what I mean by this is, just because I have a different position with someone, or if someone is a bit older than me, this sets very, very clear boundaries on how you and that other person interact. In Japan, we have this system called senpai kohai, which means junior and senior, where respect is automatically given to people of higher authority, no matter the situation. This senpai kohai structure is exactly what contributes to this toxic environment that is present in Black companies. It reinforces a superiority complex in those who are higher rank or those who are older, but most importantly, it creates an atmosphere where questioning authority is basically impossible, and it creates a very rigid environment where you're not even allowed to question anything just because they're older than you. Not to mention, this hierarchical system leads to excessive respect for authority, and don't get me wrong, respect is an important key element to everything, but this is different in a sense where it is impossible for new ideas to surface. Silence is unfortunately always going to be safer than expressing disagreement in Japanese culture. The next thing I want to highlight is indirect communication and passive aggression. Culturally as a whole, it is very, very normal to speak in a very indirect manner, whether that is in the dating scene or the work culture or whatever social context you're in. It is practically normal to sort of speak in indirect terms rather than speaking to someone straight up, where it is very normalized in Western cultures. Not only this, but confrontation is almost always avoided, even for straightforward issues. Recently, I actually had a personal experience regarding this, which made me feel really confused and emotional and feel all sorts of ways, but mostly confused. I randomly had my coworker come up to me and tell me that my manager and my assistant manager felt ways regarding my lack of use of keigo. Keigo is Japan's elaborate system of polite language that is used to show respect. Obviously, I try my best to talk in keigo as much as I can, but considering that, I spent the last 4 years in Canada, I spoke English my entire life. This is my first work experience in Japan, and it's only been 2 weeks. I understand the level of concern, but I was more so confused about why I was hearing this from my coworker who had nothing to do with this issue. I didn't understand the reason why my manager was telling my coworker for my coworker to tell me. I didn't understand the purpose of it. I was just genuinely so confused, and it left me feeling very emotional because this is not the type of environment that I want to be in, even though it's technically not a Black company as intense as some of these other firms that people work at. But I just genuinely didn't understand. I would have appreciated for my manager to tell me straight up, but maybe that's just the way things are in Japan. But obviously, in more intense environments, this could lead to passive aggression, where higher ups or people with positions of authority may give you passive aggression to show you that you're doing something wrong but not want to say straight to your face. And I feel like personally, it's worse off hearing it from someone else rather than that person directly. I do understand the use of this coworker that was aimed to be a middleman for me and my manager was to soften our interaction, but I feel like this could lead to passive aggression as well as misunderstandings, because I could have easily asked my manager, what could I do better, or what instances did you feel like I wasn't using proper language that didn't show respect. I believe that this indirectness can prevent honestness as well as open dialogue that could have easily been done. The next thing is keigo, which I briefly mentioned earlier. Keigo is a language barrier that creates distance. As mentioned previously, keigo is sort of a system of Japanese polite polite language that aims to express respect. The ironic thing is keigo outside of working environments is actually rarely used. But not only that, keigo creates a sense of distance between two people of different positions. Not only does keigo create the distance between two people, but it reinforces the hierarchical structure like I mentioned previously. In contrast, English working environments don't have such an extensive language-based hierarchy, which allows for a level playing field and less formal interaction. Lastly, what I want to emphasize is the fear of challenging the status quo. Earlier in this video, I mentioned about how people agree without question in Japanese culture and how that ties into the working environments, especially in Black companies. And this is to maintain harmony as well as the whole hierarchical system where, it's not really allowed. You're going to be looked down upon. You're going to lose your reputation. Everyone's going to hate on you if you speak up or disagree on your superiors. But because no one speaks up, as a result, not only is the workplace entirely inefficient, but poor decisions are continuously made because they're rarely challenged. This leads to stagnation and resistance to change, which I also feel like plays into the part of why Japanese economy is failing us. What I'm trying to say is this whole ingrained obedience to our higher ups. I want to say they kiss ass. That's literally what Japanese culture is. Like, you are basically bred to kiss someone's ass, kiss everyone's ass that is around you. I'm sorry for my language. It's a serious issue that really needs to be talked about. I don't think anything is going to change unless we have better managers, better people of authority who can lead a team that is actually effective and who is encouraged to speak up. This ingrained obedience leads to the exploitation of employees because people don't want to speak up. They're too afraid to. People are hesitant to question unfair practices. Even if they're doing overwork and not being paid, they're not going to question it. Ultimately, Black companies end up thriving, unfortunately. And people in the higher ups and people of authority in these Black companies remain unchanged. They remain unchanged and unchallenged. And one more thing I'd like to add is that challenging the status quo is sort of dawning on people, especially because it disrupts the harmony amongst people. Japanese social and cultural norms has led to a work culture and working environment amongst so many companies that people end up staying silent because staying silent is better than speaking up, which is so unfortunate. How different of a species we would be, how much more effective and how much better of an economy we would be thriving in if people were just less entitled about their position, To wrap things up, I do understand that, Japan is known for its meticulousness, its formality, its following and obedience of rules and how it's extraordinary. And that's part of our culture that I do value a lot. But to what extent of this meticulousness, What extent does it have to be that a lot of our workers are ending their lives because they're overworked and they genuinely can't find another way to live a different life? How unfortunate is it that people feel so shut down and feel like they genuinely can't speak up, that they have no other way, that they have to suck ass, that this is just one way of living when you only have one life and this is the way you want to live your life? I'm so sorry. I am such a you only live once girl. People need to change, things need to change, systems need to change, and it starts by talking. So let's talk about it more. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. This one got a little bit emotional to me, and I'm sorry if I yap too much. But yeah, if you want to see me talk about a different topic that you'd like me to speak on, leave them down below, and I will see you in the next one.